We are recording.
All right, doing another unbooking today because we enjoy doing them. Hopefully you enjoy watching them. Stick with us to the end. You'll see what it's all about. We don't really get into a deep review of the book. We just unbook it. Unbooking. We're still not really sure what this is, so let's go into it. Today we are doing a book by Dale Carnegie. This book was written in 1936. Now, before we get too much into the book, Dale Carnegie was born in 1888, I believe in Missouri, was born to farmers. He said that he used to get up at 3 a.m. to feed the pigs and the chickens before he went to school and all of that. So, born into some poverty, had a very interesting life. Man, but he turned out to be pretty smart feller. Became a lecturer and an author, a very well-known and respected author, especially for this book that I said was written in 1936. Since then, it has sold over, Paulie, listen to this, 15 million copies, making it one of the best-selling books of all time. What an achievement to have one of the best-selling books ever. I don't know if anybody will ever beat the Bible. Still number one, right?
I guess.
I'm pretty sure.
I didn't do that research before.
Google that. This book was also picked as one of Time Magazine's most influential books of all time, which is also pretty impressive to have that placed on this book alongside one of the best-selling of all time. So without any further ado, today's book for unbooking. Jeez, I thought you were going to hit me with that. Today's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Right off the bat, he's very confident. The only book you need to lead you to success. I mean, right out of the gate, he's very confident in this book. And apparently he should have been. Again, I'm assuming that he wrote that from day one. I don't know. Somebody was very confident in this book. But over 75 years in print, 15 million copies sold, one of the most 100 on the list of the most influential books of all time. Yeah, I would be pretty confident in this book as well. And you should too, because this book is up there in my favorite books of all time. I talk about 7 Habits a lot. This book is one of the only books that really rivals that book, and it is so dense with valuable information. It's not even some books we unbook, there's little nuggets here and there. There's no nuggets in this book. This thing is just gold.
There's no nuggets. That is just one whole chicken.
It is the whole chicken, baby. Remember how we did the 7 Habits book and I was like, I don't even feel right about just doing an unbooking on this book. It deserves so much more. I feel the same way about this book. It's in my top 3 for sure, and I don't know what the third one would be besides 7 Habits. I just know I'm very, very confident. You couldn't go to my bookshelf in my house and pull any other books that I would put above this one because I thought it was that good. So what is How to Win Friends and Influence People about? Well, in Dale Carnegie's own words, he said that it's a practical working handbook on human relations. Now, this is the cool part of that. Have you ever heard the statement, scratch your own itch? Mm-hmm. So people say if there's something that bothers you or something that you're looking for and you can't find it, or something that you just really want to settle yourself, chase that thing and do it. Don't sit around and wonder what does everybody want? What do I need to do? If there's an itch that you have, scratch it. And what's interesting is right at the beginning of the book, he says the reason this book even became a book, the reason he wrote it at all, is because out of all of this business material he went through and all of these different things, he said he was unable to find this book. He said he wasn't able to find that practical working handbook on human relations. So he says, I tried to write it. And that's how he starts the book. This is what that's supposed to be. And he says, I hope you enjoy it. I see why this sold 15 million copies. I get it. This book will never be out of date. It'll never go out of style. It will always be relevant because it is exactly that. It's a practical working handbook on human relations. He talks about dealing with people and what people want from you, how you should respond to them. He talks about listening. I mean, he goes into so much. It's one of those books where it's you're reading it and you're going, I knew that already. But he just puts it in a way, and he's very, very, very prepared to write this book. He talks about all the interviews and all the research that he did. The first thing you see when you open up this book, it says, the more you get out of this book, the more you'll get out of life. And then he says, in order to get the most out of this book, and he gives a list of things that he wants you to do. And there are things like you've may seen in other books, like take your time, practically apply these steps, write them down, circle it, and he's just telling you, underscore each important idea, review the book every month. He's just telling you, if you really want to get this out, take your time. Like, don't just read it and be done with it. Like, use this as a practical working guide. I have so many good things to say about this book. Let me just go through the notes, or I'm just going to rant for the next hour, and then it wouldn't be an unbooking. One of the main takeaways that I got from this book is that he points out that we need to remember, first and foremost, he puts it right near the front of the book, that when we're dealing with people, we're dealing with creatures of emotion and not logic. And man, that's so important to remember. And I remember reading this book the first time, and when I read that, I was like, it's like light bulb went off, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's how I should frame every conversation and every relationship, is to realize that when that person responds in a certain way, it's not necessarily because that's exactly what they think. That's what they felt in that moment. You got to give people that freedom to be emotional, and you need to be intelligent and prepared enough to understand that, and then to respond in an appropriate manner. I read that, and I just read it again today when I was preparing for this video, and I was just like, oh yes. So I should do what he said. I should go over this book each month, probably. Another thing, just another practical thing that I loved about this book is his dedication at the beginning, which I think was like so beautiful. He said, this book is dedicated to a man who doesn't need to read it. My cherished friend, Homer Croy. And it's like, what a compliment to give somebody. Like, he wrote a book on how to deal with people and how to influence people. And he said, this book is dedicated to my friend who absolutely did not need to read it. And I was like, so it's like that. Everything that happens when you're reading this book is like, wow, man, I like this guy. Yeah. You really leave with the impression that, first of all, that he really does care, because even after all that, he goes into another section of how to really take advantage of this book. So he's taking his own advice in the book, is what he talks about, is really speaking to people with empathy, and really like reaching out and caring about people is one thing that he says. Like, you have to first be interested in the other person and stay interested. And that's like a key to life. And that's what he does. He makes you feel right at the beginning is like he really wants you to get something from this. So it's really cool to see that work even practically as you're reading it, even if you don't realize it until afterwards or right now, like I'm talking. Another main takeaway, he says, any fool can criticize or condemn, but it takes a person of real character to be understanding and forgiving. The easiest response when somebody disappoints you or when somebody fails is to criticize or condemn that person. And he's saying, but if you really want to be a next level individual, if you really want to be a person of character, it takes a little more intelligence, and it takes a little more emotional intelligence to be understanding and be forgiving. And he has a whole section on what if somebody does disappoint you? What if you're leading and people aren't keeping up? Like, how do you deal with that? And it's probably one of the longest sections in the book, because I remember seeing the list of his like principles at the end of each chapter, which is another thing I love. At the end of each chapter, he gives you just like a quick hitter, like, this is what the point is. This is what the point is. And it makes the book very easy to read and makes the points very memorable. Which normally I don't like that, because I feel like, why don't I just go through and read the points? But the book is so well written, you actually want to read it. But what I was saying, alluding to earlier, is that he talks about if people do fail you, and like, instead of just criticizing and condemning, he has this whole section on how you should deal with that. And it's not for the purpose of like, okay, just act these things out, and that's the right way to do it so that person does what you want. It's deeper than that. He really is talking about people need to feel like you care about them. So care about them. And this is what caring about them looks like. I've read books on persuasion, and it's like that. Well, tell people this to make them do what you want. And he has similar language where he says, if you want people to get what you want, you have to make them want to do it. But his point is that you have to have a genuine, sincere love and interest in people to do that. He's like, if you do want to influence people, you have to actually like people and care about them in order to do so. And if you do like and care about them, then these are the things that you'll do naturally. So just go ahead and do them now, and then that'll help you kind of along the way. One thing that he says over and over and over again, that, you know, being a leader on the scale that I'm a leader and being a follower that I want, is he says people want to feel important. And he says it over and over again, that you should really, really strive to make people feel important, because they are. And that's his whole point. You don't have to trick people. The problem is when you feel like people aren't important, that's when you run into the issue. So it's kind of like what you get from a lot of other books is like, treat people like they're important. And that's kind of where it stops. His whole point is people are important, so treat them like it.
Yeah.
So there's that extra layer of just sincerity. And that's why this book has sold 15 million copies. And that's why this book works for people, is because it actually is the real deal. It's covering the full spectrum, and it's not just some farcical facade of a thing. Like, you know, you're important, so let's talk about it. You know, like if anybody's ever had a boss where they sit down and they're like, I've made mistakes throughout my career. Now, the reason I brought you in here is because you did this and this. All it is they're regurgitating some model that they heard at some conference of like, you know, make sure you point out your faults before you talk about someone else's, which is something he says in the book. But again, he adds that extra layer where he's like, don't just point out your faults. Remember that you're not perfect. And then remember that that other person is not perfect, and that you're both emotional beings and not logical. And now address that. Let me read you these principles. A leader's job often includes changing your people's attitudes and behavior. Some suggestions to accomplish this. That's another thing. So I've talked about books before being like pretentious. He phrases everything like, here are some suggestions that you can try. You know what I mean? Because I think he has a general understanding. You know, my dad always used to say something, be wary of people who know it all. And, you know, when you're reading a book and it's like, this is how it is, this is how it is, this is, I mean, just experience in life. Not everything is black and white. Not everything is figured out. You know, even the things we think are, they're not figured out, you know. So it was good reading this because it's just very genuine, very sincere approach. But he says, a leader's job often includes changing your people's attitudes and behavior. Some suggestions to accomplish this. And he lists these principles right here that were from this section of the book. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. Not just like, I appreciate the work you're doing with this. Okay, you screwed up. You know, it's got to be honest.
The compliment sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. Call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. He talks about, we try to accomplish the positive of it. As of pointing out one person's negative, we try to accomplish the positive. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person, which again, he goes deeper into that. Ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Let the other person save face. So, no, I told you so's. If you're like, well, I think it would be better if we did this, and it ends up failing, then you move on, or you stick up for that person, because they already know. There's no use in beating them down anymore. You know, and he talks about how much rapport and how much better you can make somebody if you allow them those, and then when they do mess up, to even build confidence in that moment as opposed to trying to tear them down. Two more things. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. You set the bar. You tell them this is who you are in my eyes, and then make them live up to that as opposed to telling them you're not what I want you to be. Another thing he said, make people's faults seem easy to correct. So if somebody messes up, instead of being like, oh God, what are we going to do? Hey, we'll figure it out. No problem. That just helps in your relationships with those people. Great stuff in here. I wanted to read something on page 111. Oh, I loved this. He talks about arguments and how pointless arguments are, how it does nothing in relationships. Of course, he goes deeper into it, but this is one thing I always remember. There's a quote in here. It says, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And I always remember that little proverb there, whatever you want to call it, because you can convince somebody with facts, but if you argued it, if you didn't really reach the person, you've done nothing. Years ago, you get on Facebook and argue every point, and you're like, who's got the best facts? It doesn't matter. And then another little anecdote here. He says, if you are satisfied with the results you are now getting, why change? But if you're not satisfied, why not experiment? Favorite quote. Oh, yes. This was the thing I left with this book. This was like the quote. People rarely succeed at anything unless they have fun doing it. And that's, you know, recently in one of our meetings, and I mentioned this, one of the first things I like to ask people or just make sure if there's a team I'm leading to say, hey, are you having fun? If the answer is no, then we're messing up.
Something has to change.
Something's got to change, because if we're not having fun, nobody's having fun. We should have fun, because you rarely succeed at anything unless you have fun doing it. Random highlight. Ooh. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. I hate that I picked that one because I am terrible with names. That's like one thing I've been working on for years in my life. Is trying to figure out ways to remember, I've read this technique where it's like when you're about to meet somebody, you ask yourself, I wonder what their name is. I wonder what their name is. And then when you meet them, that's supposed to help you remember. Doesn't work. My wife is insane with names. She's literally like my name bank. And then like I get frustrated. It's something like I care about. I'm not just like, oh, I don't remember names. Like I hate the fact that I don't remember those names. It bothers me. But it's something I'm working on. And I do think that I have made some improvement. So, yeah. And this was a big book that really, really got me started into caring about that even more. So, all right, read it or beat it. If it isn't obvious, you have to read this book. I'll go as far to say, if you could only read 3 more books the rest of your life, this is one of the 3. Hands down. And actually, when I phrase it like that, I don't even know if I would put 7 Habits in that context. Because this one is just so important on any and every level. Because it's beyond just being successful, beyond just getting financial freedom. It's beyond all of those things. And really just, it's a practical working handbook on human relations, and it will never be outdated. Sincerely, I do want to say, read this book. Like everybody. It doesn't matter if you don't give a flip about business, success, any of the stuff we talk about. Go read this book, because not only will it help you understand other people better, you'll understand yourself better. Aliens come down, they're like, we want to learn about humans. We need a couple books. This is one of them. Like, this is one of the books that you give to say this is kind of what humans are like. And then they would take that knowledge, attain it, and use it to dominate our species. The book is that good that it could lead to the ruin of mankind. Go read this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'm not even going to hit this book. I don't think I did in 7 Habits either. I'm going to leave this book right here. Matter of fact, it's the last thing you're going to see. This book, not me, because I'm an idiot. This book is good. If you've read any of these books, let us know about it. Seriously, if I messed up the explanation, if you could have done this better than me, then go ahead and do it in the comments. Subscribe, click the little bell thingy. Let's have a good time. Really want to hear from you. And what books do you want to see unbooked? Let me know. Hit us up. Measure a mug.